afternoon. So, picking up where we left off, and really what I need to do at this point is knock out a whole bunch of story because that's going to be necessary to generate mastery points. So, for example, I'm gonna do Heart of Thorns right now. Yeah, well, I'm gonna need that here pretty soon. Uh, I'm going to need more available mastery points to get the masteries that I want, particularly because in the gliding track, I want to get to advanced gliding. And so that in of itself, just the gliding path, I'm going to need 2, 5, 10, 18. I got 6 right now. Now there are a whole bunch that I can gather throughout, and Dragon Stand offers a ton. So once Dragon Stand's available to me, and theoretically, I could get there now. I could get to Dragon Stand right now. But it would be frustrating to play, extremely difficult to play without, at a minimum, updrafts, which I'm close to anyway. But point being, gonna need to do some story. And while I may not need to finish the Heart of Thorns story or the Pathfire story or even some of the Living World, there might be a couple Living World that I might have to actually finish to achieve certain things. But some of it is going to need to be progressed. So that's what I'm going to do today. And for purposes of the YouTube video later, probably cut a lot of that out. Just skip around a little bit. All right, let's do it. Let's jump back into Heart of Thorns, where we were really early. Honestly, like just entered Burden Brim.
That's quality armor.
Glad you're
Thank
here,
you so
Commander.
much.
The pack still needs
Take a
your
look.
help, especially with all the distrust being aimed at Silvari.
I'll do what I can, but I've got to find.
So they had a
Destiny's
lot of
engine for her.
potential here in
Mordred
Heart of
took them all
Thorns
prisoner. They
with
could be
the
anywhere. I need
concept
to know where they were
that
taken, or at least find
because of the
someone who knows
Silvari's
lay of the
tie
land.
to
I've seen
Mordremoth,
reports.
who's the
Force
big bad
marching high-value
for Heart of
prisoners
Thorns,
west, deeper into the jungle.
because of the relationship
It's not
between
much,
Silvari and
but
the
it's a
dragon,
start.
they
As for
could have
knowledge of the
really done a
terrain,
lot
If you head north, you'll also run into a
to
village of
dig
local
much
hunters
deeper
called Kits.
into kind of the concepts of
They're fast and agile,
prejudice
and they
versus
know how to
isolating
get
a
around.
threat and kind of
With
looking
their
at some
help, Your
themes.
search will go a lot faster. But the
You know,
first thing
things that
I
are very
do is
like
check in
World
at
War
the large
II
pack
ish,
camp in
kind
the
of, where
west.
we
The
saw a
people
lot
there
of
should know more. Oh, and keep that glider
debatable
handy.
decision making in
Navigating
terms
the
of
jungle is
how
dangerous.
countries
One wrong
domestically
step
face the
around
threat.
here can be fatal.
The United States, for example, with internment camps and stuff like that. Like, we look back at that, and we certainly have feelings about it, strong feelings, and definitely feel like we know what's right and wrong in that capacity. At the same time, um, clearly there were people at that point in time in American history who felt that that was necessary to achieve national security. Those are hard conversations. If you're big into history and you're trying to like educate your child on that and talk to your kid about like prejudice and so forth, difficult conversations there. And they had a lot of potential to go down that road and look at that kind of thing with this.
Sweet, sweet.
And yet they barely touched it. There's like one event that takes place where they kind of address that, where a number of Silvari are being held by the Pact in kind of a quarantined area or a sequestered area, and the commander actually, or the player character, participates in questioning them and trying to determine if they are adversarial or not. And there are a few dialogue little bits that take place there that give us insight into what they could have done, and maybe even talked about it internally or played with the idea a bit, and ultimately didn't do it. And throughout the story, there are a couple other times where they hint at it. Canuck talks about not wanting to be watched, or hey, you don't have to babysit me, like I'm not a threat to you. And in the opening sequence for Heart of Thorns, we see a Char talk about how she cannot trust the Silvari, and she doesn't want to dedicate resources or risk personnel to saving Silvari. It kind of, for me, well, actually, I'll go this way. It kind of, for me, once again reinforces the idea that while in theory there are themes and there are things taking place within the Guild Wars 2 storyline that are in some way, somewhat mature topics or dark in some capacity, they never quite get there. They kind of come off as their approach to it is almost childish sometimes, or lacking a certain degree of maturity or gravitas. Kind of unfortunate, but I suppose I don't know how that would impact the ESRB rating, and I don't know how internally the studio feels about playing with topics like that. There's certainly a place in gaming for it, but it seems ArenaNet has no appetite for it. I do think this next story bit, while certainly played out after you've done it, a number of times, on the first playthrough was interesting for me. It gives you kind of a tactical decision, which we'll get to up here in a few minutes, that I found relatively.
Commander, look over there.
I don't know that I want to say thoughtful, but ArenaNet is not a studio that I would generally associate with, like, I assume they don't have a lot of prior military on their staff. That to me seems kind of unlikely.
Time to do some real damage.
Certainly not more than one or two. But the tactical decision that we're going to make up here in a little bit does reflect, at least some thought. Like they took a step back and said, what kind of difficult decision might someone have to make under those circumstances? Which is, kudos to them.
I say we strike first and hit the Mordrum as they muster. They won't expect us to attack them.
Too risky. Our people here need protection. We should focus on improving the village's defenses.
What say you, strangers?
So there's the
Am I
tactical
allowed
decision I
to?
was referring to.
I would appreciate your counsel.
Do you shelter in place? Do you further develop your defensive capability, in the hopes of keeping the enemy from reaching that? Or do you go on the offensive to thus keep the enemy at bay because you are now pushing on the enemy instead of them pushing on you?
Strangers, if this works, I promise that in turn
it's a valid, in a conventional warfare environment,
Good luck.
it's a valid challenge that a commander would face at the operational level, right? Because the tactical units are going to do what they're told. Rarely is a tactical level commander going to make a decision like that. What he's doing nests within the scheme of the higher echelons, but like at an operational level, people are making those decisions, and
compared to the rest of Mortimer,
the impact of choosing wrong is disastrous, right?
And the most dangerous.
Jungle provides.
The village is safe from Mordrum Guard, for now. I just wish we knew more about those blister growths.
There are many times in the Guild Wars 2 storytelling where I do wonder how far ahead they plan, and
Just one more confirmation.
there's the mastery point that we need. How far ahead they plan and how much of their storytelling is
The Mordrum Guard
a reaction to previous storytelling, and how much of it is, how effectively do they actually foreshadow? So the idea here that corpses are put into these blister pods and are reanimated, and eventually that is presented to us as an extension of Zaitan's power, and so we begin to understand that as the dragons are eliminated, some of their capability and power transitions to other dragons.
Is it just me, or am I amazing?
I do wonder if that was the plan from the get-go, or if it became a convenient. Yeah, let's grab it. Oh wait, that's a different one. That's the one up above. I'm not gonna mess with that. Whether it was planned or a reaction. There have definitely been times when I felt like their storytelling was reactionary, that they were responding to either their best guess of what they had already created, or an actual response. I really felt like Season 3 very possibly was an actual response to the player community, which I found super weird.
Your friends may be skilled.
Hey, about that. When are you gonna fess up about how you got these new skills?
So that right there.
Sir?
Maybe when more
And the whole
one of
mist thing
Chiefy puppets is
continues to
trying
this
kill
day
us.
to be a
Until
little
then,
bit of a
stop
point of
asking.
contention
He's
for
right. Focus on
for
the
some
mission
folks.
logs. By the 6.
because it
That's a lot of
is
pen.
kind of a thing where it just, you know, it's kind of a hand wave.
We need
You know,
something
he went into the
clear.
mist and
Agreed.
things happened,
There's airship wreckage
and
scattered
then he
across
came
the
back, and
platform.
there's the potential
Let's
for a
see if
lot
we
of
can
interesting
gather
stuff
some
there.
incendiaries.
So even if you're not hung up on it as a
This pack weapons
gap
crate is still
in the
intact,
plot,
and
because
there's
you recognize
coordinates here
that
we can use.
it's probably not one they're adequately prepared to fill. It also, I think, in the eyes of a lot of players, represents an opportunity to tell very interesting story that is not being capitalized on. Kind of like the second Sylvari tree, which appears in the core Sylvari story, and then we don't ever really see any reference to again. Where certainly Heart of Thorns would have been an incredible time for that, and we don't get it. And that was one of the things that was rumored to actually be like some of the cut content. I actually strongly suspect it was not. I really don't think that they ever intended to revisit that with Heart of Thorns, although it would have been the perfect place. But to kind of come back to Ritlock's little adventure, we will ultimately in Pathfire get a tiny bit more, but it doesn't answer any questions. On the contrary, it actually begs a lot more questions. So by the point we're at right now in 2022, we don't know much of anything about that experience
Time to do some
for
real damage.
Ritlock. And we have a lot of questions about it, and it just is this huge kind of running joke because there's a whole bunch of story that could be told there that is very clearly not going to be told there at any point in the near future. I strongly suspect it won't ever really adequately be told. I think general consensus is that the right vehicle for that would be... Why is that one still not down? That the right vehicle would probably be Fractals, and I definitely feel like the right vehicle for that would be Fractals, where we could actually, you know, as a five-man group, we could take on the character of some sort of mistbound entity or mistbound hero who assists Ritlock in some way, and through that role, we learn kind of what his experience was and how he came to, because I think part of the big question, I think one of the things that people who are really tied in lore really care about is, so Glint gave him the powers of the Revenant, but what does that mean? Did she train him? Like, did he spend time, like, literally, like, practicing being a Revenant with Glint, or what does that look like? If you're not necessarily tied into that with the lore, then, you know, at a minimum, like, you know, because the mist can be anything, then there's just vast opportunity there. And I think the fact that the mist can be anything gives them significant storytelling potential anyway, and so you know,
I've never encountered
while I
tendrils
don't
that
think they'll
powerful
follow through
before.
on the Ritlock thing, I do think at some point in time
knows we're here, but it doesn't
we're going to,
seem
you know,
concerned.
continue to see a
It's
lot
interesting,
more
but not
mist
urgent.
content, because it gives them
That's what it
freedom
wants us to think.
that
Everyone, keep your eyes open and move up to that
Tyria
clearing.
itself doesn't necessarily
The
give them.
Overseer stations himself nearby.
Release us! Now!
Fowlet, why is Mordremoth locking up so many nightmare courtiers?
You know nothing of the court. We seek freedom, and Mordremoth's yoke is even more onerous than the pale trees.
Forget her.
So
just
that
get
right
me
there
out.
is,
The Morgans are logging
of all the
exposure and
things
they're
that
hiding people in the
theoretically
jungle, and I
they
don't know
may
why.
have, or according to the
Hang on,
rumors,
Mother.
may have
Lots of
cut
busty
from
out
Heart
there.
of Thorns because of time constraints, that is by far the one that I feel we suffered from
Grin,
losing
I
the
call
most.
upon your power.
Like if there was a negative impact, which in theory there would be if you cut content that you had intended to put in the game, and then you cut it and it's no longer there, then in theory you have a negative impact. But the real pain of that, in my opinion, is the removal of the Nightmare Court from the storyline, or from relevance within the storyline in Heart of Thorns. That should have been tremendously important from a lore perspective and from kind of a the philosophy of the game perspective. We should have seen significant conceptual play between Heart of Thorns and Mordremoth, and that dialogue right there with Faolain nails it. Of all the kind of
I'm sorry.
Groups of bad guys that exist within the core game, you got like the Inquest, you got bandits and pirates, and the Nightmare Court, you got the Char, Flame Legion, and the Renegades.
There are rituals.
Of all those,
gone.
I think the ones
Spirits. I don't even know.
I would say there are two that are very relatable to the point where you can really deeply understand what they aspire to, and it like there's some real sense behind it. And that would be like the Renegades and the Nightmare Court, or the Separatists. When I say Renegades, I guess what I should be saying is the Separatists, around like Ebonhawk. They're pretty relatable, and it's understandable why they do what they do. And the Nightmare Court are relatable, and it's easy to understand why they do what they do. Do they go too far? Yes, absolutely. Are they sinister? Yeah. Again, with the idea that ArenaNet really struggles to do sinister well, the Nightmare Court does a decent job of that. But in spite of that, when you look at the philosophy behind the Nightmare Court, it's probably as relatable as any of the villainous philosophies within the game.
Commander,
So their
not sure if this is
absence
important, but I just saw
from
your comrades, the
Heart of
Nora in
Thorns, when it
Char,
theoretically
carrying
was
bodies.
going to be there,
I'm sorry to report.
given the
that
fact
was
that they're
Heir Sylvari.
Sylvari and that
She fell in
that
combat
would
with
have
one of
that would
the
have
new
significance is really problematic.
My condolences.
You
She
know,
was
the
an
fact that there may or may
inspiration to
not
all
have
of
been
us.
another path in Dragon Stand, I don't
missed.
care that much. 3 paths
Not just
functions
missed.
great.
She'll be
Dragon
avenged.
Stand works
Mordremoth
really,
will
really
pay for
well.
all
It's
the
my
lives it's
personal
destroyed.
favorite meta event,
I'll spread the word. Heir will be remembered.
although it's immensely
I
time consuming.
promise you.
Thank you. I'm
But
pressing on to
the
find Trahearne and the
lore
rest of
question
Destiny's Edge
of
before
what
Mordremoth
Mordremoth
claims
meant
them,
for
too.
the Nightmare Court, not having that is problematic, in my opinion. I wonder how South is doing. So they made changes to South, so that it's like generally a 1 burn, which is good because South is a little bit harder to kind of work through the process associated with bringing down the shield on South. So I'm glad they did that. Reduce the number of angry, panicky maps.
Time to do some real
So
damage.
one thing that I love about the Priory, now in fairness, a map kind of needs to have certain things populated within it as soon as the players set foot in it, right? Because you want to have merchants there, and you want to have you know, various NPCs for various reasons, and having a certain amount of interaction again with the NPCs makes
What's the
a
situation?
map kind of feel
Commander,
more
we've made camp
robust.
down the hill near the big spire. We discovered that the spires
So,
provide
so
some
you
security,
gotta have them
and
there. But
we let our guard down.
so often it's
We
the
were too
Priory
focused on these strange
that is
ruins.
already there when we arrive in a new
Connected to
map.
the spires, but
Guild Wars 2 has done a fantastic job of introducing new
Jazz,
maps with
Jory,
regularity.
Get these people safely back to their camp.
I think
Everyone else with me.
the rate at
gotta
which the
cover.
playable area within this game has grown is actually pretty impressive. There maybe were a few things that they could have done better, but
You'll have to keep one.
they've done a pretty good job at rewarding us with new
We'll
maps,
regroup after we help these pack soldiers.
and I do appreciate that. The fact that the Priory is so often that element is pleasing to me because of what they represent. They kind of represent this research branch, which is somewhat academic in nature, but also kind of, you know, a little bit occultish because they kind of represent kind of the arcane side of things too. So they research not just historical things, but kind of hidden secrets and
We were all
kind of the
happy
metaphysical.
now. Now tell me, who's that glowy person we saw?
So for
before
them
the
to
attack?
be the folks who are already in a map when we get there is super cool because it feeds that
It looks
idea.
connected to
It
the
feeds the idea
spires,
that you're entering
the
a
ones
place
that
you
reacted
have
to
never
Kate.
been before,
Let's find out what
only
it's
to
up to.
discover that,
Also, tell me
you know, these
everything about
explorers
these
and
old
these
monsters.
researchers and these
Hey!
archivists have entered this area in order to further advance this academic or even arcane pursuit. And that's fun. I would not be averse to ArenaNet kind of further developing that.
You there, stop.
So as we look at future story, you know, a lot of people have kind of speculated, well, you know, we're going to see more stuff in the Mist, and I think that's a genuine possibility.
End of the line, pal.
And I think there's a lot that can be done there. But
I'm in the midst
if
of
you
an
separate
important
that
mission.
kind of
I
solution for
must
everything, because
follow
that's
the
what it
trail
is,
before it goes cold.
then
What is your mission? Who do you serve?
with the dragons gone,
I am Ruka, the Wanderer
you have to
of the
kind of,
Exalted.
you know, huge
We are
spoiler
charged
for
with
End of Dragons,
preserving
like the
life
title wasn't.
from the predations of elder dragons.
So with the dragons gone,
Then we share
what
a common
direction do
goal.
you then go?
And a common enemy.
We have existing
I'm the
enemies
commander
already
of the
within the
pact,
game, and I talked
here to
about them a
wage
little
war
bit ago,
against
right? You got
Mordremoth.
the Nightmare Court and the Inquest and
As for my mission,
the
I'm
Separatists
tracking
and
an
Char
object.
Renegades and
These devices respond to Glint's legacy.
Icebrood
which
are actually a
means
bad example because they were tied to the dragons. So,
It must be.
you know, all these different things that you could
Did you say
potentially
egg?
fall back on.
After all these years,
But
I must go quickly.
they've been in the game for so long that I don't
might
know that
need
that's
help.
engaging
You
to a
may
lot of
accompany
players.
me
I don't
if
know
you
if they
wish.
feel that was very
I
rewarding.
should stay here for a while and get these people organized.
The
They
the
need me.
three
Besides, we should
kind
learn as
of
much as we can about these
factions
magical
of
defensive
the
pillars.
Pact,
Good
the
idea.
Order of
We'll be back as
Whispers,
soon as we can.
the Priory, and the Vigil also have been in the game that long, but have not been explored necessarily to the same degree.
Listen here, Priory people.
Now,
I have sensors
the Order of Whispers were kind of expanded upon, and perhaps kind of our perception of them was altered by some of the events in Path of Fire and the Order of Shadows being like a branch of the Order of Whispers, and that whole thing, which I mean was fine, I guess. I don't know that I loved it. It was fine. But so we've
happening?
already had some play with the Order of Whispers,
power is
and again, it's
coursing
kind of
through
different
me.
now than it was.
Worry about that later. Get out of here.
In theory, the Vigil is maybe obsolete now because they were directly tied to the dragons. So as the dragons have ceased to be kind of a valid bad guy for us now, in theory at least, and hopefully that is the case. The Vigil maybe is no longer a fully,
It reminds me of the Zephyrite crystals, but it's stronger.
I don't want to say fully viable, but maybe no longer the same thing that they were. Right? The Priory, however, in theory, is exactly what they've always been, and that their mission should not have changed in any way. And I think you could. I suck. I think you could build a story. Now, I'm not saying build an entire expansion off the Priory, because that would be a big ask, right? But I think you could incorporate the orders into the storytelling, and you have one that maybe needs to redefine its identity in the Order of Whispers, one that needs to redefine its purpose in the Vigil, and then one that I think we could really benefit from exploring who and what they are, and that would be the Priory. To make that again, not the primary focus, but to make that a relevant part of an expansion, I think would be nice to see. I think it would be rewarding in a sense. Do I necessarily expect it? Probably not, because again, with the orders having been around for so long, maybe that would turn some folks off. But
Hurry! This way.
I like the Priory. I feel like there's a lot of space within what the Priory is to kind of give us more. Alright, so let's take a look at the age of this character. 8 hours, 3 minutes. And we are at 8 mastery points. So I really feel good about that. Understanding that that's not sustainable. That the early masteries come much easier than later masteries. But to be at the point where we're at 8 hours, like I'm pretty good with that. If we were to try to make 10 at 10 hours, we could easily do that by going into Heart of Thorns and getting some more masteries there through the story, and we would easily be at 10 in 10 hours, or more Pathfire, because really some of the easy ones in Pathfire are still pretty accessible too. But I like where we're at in terms of our pursuit. I think when I pick it up again, what I'm going to try and do is, because we need, and let's make sure we're working on the right ones. We're not. Exalted. There we go. That's what we need. So we need exalted markings to progress in our story, and I want to advance the story a little bit more to get us some of the things that we need before probably shifting to another story and grabbing some of these masteries to make the game easier to navigate for us. So in order to do that, I want to catch Chat Garant here soon. So I'm going to take a little break, and then we'll grab Chat Garant and progress this count a little bit more today. So see you when the Garant pops up.